For years, Officer Dalton thought a badge gave him the right to silence anyone who dared to speak. He saw 17-year-old Liana Brooks standing calmly with a phone in her hand and saw a threat. He grabbed her, cuffed her, and charged her with obstruction, all for recording him using force on a black student. He assumed she'd be scared, compliant, forgettable. But when they picked Liana Brooks, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know she was a born fighter, a self-taught legal mind, and a young woman raised never to look away from injustice. What came next wasn't just justice, it was exposure. It was one girl pulling back the curtain on a system that had covered for men like him for far too long. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Sunlight filtered through the courtroom blinds, casting long shadows across the silent benches. Liana stood alone, her second-hand binder pressed to her chest, as the weight of truth gathered behind her like a storm ready to break. The courtroom was hushed, cool with marble floors and the kind of silence that made even footsteps feel too loud. Into that space walked a girl, not in a suit, not with a lawyer at her side, but alone, with a second-hand binder clutched to her chest and fire in her eyes. Her name was Liana Brooks, 17 years old, high honors, quiet in the halls, steady in her studies, the kind of girl teachers trusted and classmates barely noticed. But on that day, the room noticed her. 2 weeks earlier, Liana had been arrested outside her high school in East Glendale. Her crime? She filmed a police officer shoving a student into a fence during an after-school altercation. She didn't yell. She didn't interfere. She simply said, "You can't do that," while holding up her phone. But to Officer Dalton, a man with years in the force and a reputation for swift, silent authority, that was enough. Within moments, her phone was twisted from her grip, her arms yanked behind her, and her cheek pressed against the hood of a cruiser. The cuffs clicked, the words came next. Obstruction of a peace officer. No one spoke up for her that day. Students stood still, adults averted their eyes. Even the school's security cameras, cold and blinking, offered no refuge. Now she stood before a judge, facing real charges that could stain her future. Her mother begged her to take the deal. Her court-appointed attorney said she'd be foolish not to. But Liana said something that stayed with her. "If I stay quiet, he gets away with it twice." Have you ever felt that silence was the most dangerous thing in the room? She wasn't there to plead. She wasn't there to disappear. Liana came to make them look again. And so, she opened her binder. The night after her arrest, Liana sat at the kitchen table, a plate of untouched food cooling beside her. The kitchen light buzzed faintly overhead, and across the room her mother stood leaning against the refrigerator, arms folded, lips pressed into a tired line. "You need to take the deal," her mother finally said. Liana looked up, confused. "What deal?" "They're offering a deferred sentence. You plead guilty, and in 6 months, if you keep clean, it comes off your record." "But I am clean," Liana whispered. Her mother's voice cracked, not from anger, but from years of understanding how the world works. "I know that, but they don't. Baby, they don't care that you stayed 12 feet away. They don't care you were calm. They already decided who you are when they saw your face." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Liana didn't speak right away. She ran her finger along the crack in the old kitchen table, the one her brother had carved into during homework years ago. Then she said, almost to herself, "If I stay quiet, he gets away with it twice." Her mother blinked, eyes glistening, but said nothing. The next day, they met with the public defender. He was polite but hurried, eyes fixed on the papers more than the girl sitting across from him. "Honestly, you should take the deal. You don't have a witness. You don't have legal training. The video's shaky. You're 17. Liana looked straight at him. "Then I'll represent myself." He raised an eyebrow. "You know this isn't TV, right? You don't win just because you're brave." She didn't flinch. I'm not here to win. I'm here to speak. Have you ever had to stand your ground when no one believed in you? Not even the people who loved you? That night, Liana opened a blank notebook. At the top of the page she wrote, "What do I need to know to make them listen?" And with that, her quiet fight began. Every morning before the sun broke through the blinds of their two-bedroom apartment, Liana Brooks was already awake. While her mother slept off long overnight shifts at the county hospital, Liana moved like a shadow, quiet, careful, determined. She brewed instant coffee, not for comfort, but to stay focused. On the kitchen table sat her new battlefield, a borrowed laptop, a cracked mug filled with pins, and that same notebook now swelling with scribbled laws and case names. She didn't know where to begin, so she started with a question. What makes a voice undeniable in a courtroom full of doubt? With no formal training, she taught herself. She watched videos on criminal law, read public defender blogs, and highlighted terms she didn't understand, then looked them up one by one. Her search history was now filled with words like Fourth Amendment, use of force protocol, and cross-examination strategy. Her binder, a $2.00 thrift store find, began to fill with printed statutes, diagrams, and handwritten notes. She created tabs for every section: statutes, contradictions, body cam law, cross-examination. Red was for lies in Officer Dalton's report. Blue was for facts she could prove. Yellow was for doubts. Things that didn't sit right, but weren't yet evidence. Every night, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her only private space, and practiced. She'd pause after key phrases, watch her reflection, adjust her tone. Some nights she cried in frustration. Other nights, she whispered the same line again and again until it came out strong. You can't erase me. What would you do if the only way to be believed was to become your own advocate? One evening, she called a legal aid hotline, pretending to be someone older, afraid they'd hang up if they knew she was just a teenager. A kind voice named Miss Yonette stayed on the line and said, "Sweetheart, don't try to sound smart. Try to sound like you belong there." That line didn't just stay with Liana. It became her armor. The first hearing was quiet, too quiet. Liana stood alone, binder in hand, facing a judge who barely looked her way and a prosecutor who smirked like he already knew the ending. She presented her video. Her voice on screen was calm, measured, her distance from Officer Dalton clear, but the footage shook too much. Tyrell's shove wasn't visible, only implied. The judge leaned back and said the words that landed like stone. Inconclusive. Liana didn't argue. She sat down slowly, her fingers digging into the binder's worn edge. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let a single tear fall. Just when she thought all her work might crumble, a soft voice cut through the stillness. "Liana?" It was Mr. Garvey, her high school history teacher. He stood at the back of the courtroom, holding up a silver USB drive. "I was there that day. I recorded it too." For a moment, the courtroom froze. Even the judge seemed startled. Liana turned, stunned. She hadn't known anyone was watching, let alone willing to step forward. That night, after the hearing, she couldn't sleep. Her hope was real, but hope alone wouldn't hold up in court. She needed more. At dawn, Liana filed a Freedom of Information request for Officer Dalton's body cam footage from that day. When she finally watched it at the public library, her stomach turned. At exactly 2 minutes and 38 seconds, the video skipped. 5 seconds gone. The shove, the threat, it was all missing. The edit was sloppy, but deliberate. Can you imagine finding proof that someone tried to erase what happened to you? She called Miss Jeanette that night, her voice tight with disbelief. "I think they cut the footage," she said. Jeanette paused, then replied, "If that's true, sweetheart, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're exposing something bigger." Liana's hands trembled as she printed the video analysis, tucked it into her binder, and underlined the word alteration twice. She wasn't just defending herself now, she was uncovering a cover-up. The second hearing felt colder. But Liana walked into the courtroom differently this time. Her shoulders were squared. Her binder, now duct-taped to the spine and bristling with color-coded tabs, was cradled like something sacred. She wasn't there to prove she belonged anymore. She knew she did. The prosecutor repeated his polished claims. Officer Dalton sat nearby, arms folded, expression smug. He didn't even glance her way. To him, this was cleanup. Just another noisy kid about to be silenced. But Liana stepped forward and asked to make a statement. "I'm not a lawyer," she said clearly, "but I know what I saw, and I know what you're all pretending not to." She handed over the new USV, Mr. Garvey's video. A better angle, a cleaner view. The courtroom dimmed, and silence swept through as the footage played. There it was. Dalton charging without pause, shoving Tyrell into the fence. Liana's voice, steady, from behind the camera. "You can't do that." No threat, no interference. When the video ended, no one moved. Even the prosecutor shifted in his seat. And then Liana made her move. She cited the state statute. Interference requires physical obstruction or direct escalation. She had done neither. Then she submitted a forensic report on the edited body cam footage. The time-stamp gap was real, so was the manipulation. Finally, she turned to Dalton. "In your report, you wrote that I approached you aggressively, but 2 separate videos show I never took a step towards you. Isn't that true?" He hesitated. "I perceived it that way." "Perception," she said softly, "is not fact. Have you ever had to remind someone in power that the truth doesn't bend just because they say so?" The judge's pen paused. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. Liana returned to her seat, not in triumph, but in truth. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't staring through her. They were listening. The final hearing didn't begin with fireworks or headlines, just a gavel, a name called, and Liana Brooks rising to her feet. The judge's expression was unreadable. But the room? Different, tense, expectant. Liana approached the stand one last time and opened a thin folder she'd kept separate from everything else. "Before we proceed to judgment," she began, "I ask to enter a new exhibit into the record." She laid the file down. It contained 6 formal complaints against Officer Dalton over the past 7 years. None were investigated, not one. Gasps were quiet but audible. The prosecutor objected. "Irrelevant history," he snapped, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her speak." Liana's voice never wavered. 2 students, 1 teacher, 3 parents, all from underfunded schools, all describing the same things: threats, force, fear. She held up a timeline. Every complaint matches Officer Dalton's school assignments. Same patterns, same silences. No discipline, no accountability. She turned to the judge. "I'm not asking this court just to clear my name. I'm asking it to look at the system that let this happen again." And then she said the line that stopped every pen in the room. "I may be the first who brought a binder, but I'm not the first who suffered. Have you ever realized that your pain wasn't just yours? That it was part of something many had carried quietly?" The judge didn't smile, didn't sigh, but her next words cracked something open. "This court finds no grounds to support the charges against Miss Brooks. All claims dismissed. Officer Dalton is hereby placed on administrative review pending further investigation." Outside, the cameras waited. Reporters shouted her name, but Liana didn't stop. She didn't wave, she didn't celebrate. She just said, "Truth doesn't need applause, just light." And with that, she walked forward, not as a girl who won a case, but as a young woman who made the system look again. Sometimes the loudest power in the room doesn't shout. It waits. It studies. It stands when others sit in silence. Liana Brooks was just a teenager, with no title, no lawyer, no spotlight. But she had something many forget: clarity of purpose, and a refusal to be erased. Her story reminds us that speaking up isn't always about anger. It's about dignity, about refusing to let someone else define your worth. For those of us who've seen years pass and know how systems fail the quiet ones, her courage feels familiar. Maybe you too once stood alone. Maybe you swallowed words to keep the peace. But truth doesn't age, and neither does integrity. Liana's path wasn't smooth, but she walked it anyway. Not to win, just to be heard. And in doing so, she lit a small path for others to follow. So wherever you are in life, remember, your voice still matters, even if it shakes, even if it's quiet. Sometimes, quiet is exactly what justice needs to begin listening. In the quiet of an ordinary morning, Liana sat at her kitchen table, not to study law, not to rehearse arguments, but simply to breathe. Her binder, once her shield, now rested closed beside her. No applause marked this moment, no headlines, just peace, the kind that follows a storm you weren't supposed to survive. That's the quiet power of standing firm, not to be praised, but to keep your soul intact. What comes next isn't always grand. It's rebuilding trust, helping others speak when they're told to be silent. It's knowing the story didn't end in the courtroom, it only began there. Liana's voice joined a chorus of voices long silenced, now rising with clarity and purpose. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.